What do you tell a client when you look at these numbers? What I found fascinating, it wasn't the Democratic number didn't necessarily move on this issue. It was the Republicans that were losing ground. It's as if the fall hasn't stopped.
And I think that there's some truth to that. But you've got to also take a look at which of these issues are traditional Democratic advantage issues and which of them are Republican.
Well, let's look at the single-digit ones, and that's where the Democrats are up to single digits. Those are the swing issues, right?
Yeah, and you know, if you look at among independents, you know, if you kind of parse out the partisans and look at independents, there's a much, not a much rosier, but a slightly rosier picture, and also just having perspective. And I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record because I've said this before.
Right.
If you look back at March 2002, 8 months before we gained 63 seats in the House, we weren't far from where we are today.
March 2010.
I'm sorry, yeah. 2010. We weren't far from where we are today, and you know that gives you some perspective about how much is baked in here, and also what it means for electoral.
I want to go back to the larger theme that seemed to be throughout this poll, and that is, if you took the president and Democratic numbers in isolation, you'd sit there, oh, they're treading water, maybe they're losing ground a little bit, but then when you put the comparison in and you throw in the alternative and the Republican Party, right, the joke is, you know, the president's the tall guy at the short guy.
Absolutely. I mean, look, I think...
and this shows the same thing.
I think in the big picture, this does not help anybody. At some point, we're all going to be dragged down a little bit. I would argue for the Republican Party, and Micah and Peter Hart have both said on our calls that, you know, things change, take the long perspective. I think the problem for the Republicans, Chuck, is on these issues of taxes and the economy, where Republicans were ahead and now Democrats are ahead. Those are Republican issues for the most part. And my thing is, when we did the open end of the poll, right, the Republicans aren't defined by what they're for. They're defined by what they're against. And, you know, the party of Reagan and Kemp, optimistic, pro-growth Republicans, where is it?
Mike, I noticed that too. It's almost like the public is viewing the party the same way. The public doesn't know what it wants. The president, there's sort of mixed views, right? And on his agenda, it was basically a 1-to-1 ratio, saying they like it versus they don't like it. But they know what they don't want, and it's the Republican agenda.
Yeah, well, there's a larger story here in this poll, and it is a rebuke of everything that's happening in Washington. Yes, the Republicans do have serious issues to confront, tactical problems, messaging problems, but we also need to take a wider stance and say there is a bigger rebuke of Washington. 51% economic confidence, which you've discussed. Right. You know, you can't look at this poll and just talk about problems for Republicans.
Fred, I want to put up the Obama job rating on the economy, because it was we looked at it under various groups, and it was striking some of the dramatic drops in his approval rating under specific entities. College graduates, 50% approval on the economy in January. That's down 12 points, down to 38. Democrats, it's down double digits. You see, even among his base, the approval rating of how he's handling the economy down. This is hurting him across the board.
Yes, and I would say two things. He's not running against someone. Right. Number one, that always helps, right, to have a foil.
When he was,
yes,
everybody looked at it in comparison.
Yes. And number two, since about the election, really, what have we been talking about? And it's not no fault administration. It's what it is. It's not really the economy. It's this mess in Washington. And I think the one thing about that point is we all know that the public thinks the problem in Washington is partisanship. Right. It appears the Republicans don't have a solution to that. And actually, they're making that worse.
That was an interesting question we threw in there the first time. Who is doing more to unify? Again, split, you could see, is sort of divided along. Independents and Democrats think the president's a little more unifying. Republicans think he's partisan, but it was universal across the board, other than core Republicans thinking that Republicans are partisan.
But if you look at, if you look just among white adults in this poll, you can see that they disagree with everything. I mean, Democrats, Republicans, and President Obama, what he's proposing, what everybody's proposing, it is a larger problem. And so that's what we need to get across. But also in talking about the economy and approval, he's not going to be running against anybody for the next 4 years. And he still has 4 years.
All right. Speaking of sort of this Republican, we tested Chris Christie and Marco Rubio, who we think right now are the two most of all the potential 2016ers, and their positive negative rating. What was interesting here, Micah, was that Chris Christie more popular broadly across the board had positive ratings among Democrats, Independents, and Republicans. But among Republicans, and he was more popular than Rubio in our favorable rating, but among Republicans, Rubio was more popular than Christie. Does that explain the CPAC snub, for instance?
Well, I think what you've got here is two of a very deep bench of very attractive leadership on the Republican side. And so that's very exciting, sitting here 4 years out from the next presidential election, seeing two very, very attractive leaders.
Are you surprised at how sort of they have pretty high name ID compared to where McCain and Romney were at the start of their presidential?
Well, for Senator Rubio, being on TV as a State of the Union didn't hurt, and I think Chris Christie's sort of seeped into popular culture now.
He is. It helps that he governs a state right near the media capital of the world.
Yeah.
I always remind people, if Chris Christie were the governor of Kansas, he may not get the same amount of attention. Fred Yang, Michael Roberts, thank you very much. We're going to have a lot on our poll over the next